Grace, I'm sorry. Give me one more chance. Daniel Reed, his voice cracking, pleads in the dimly lit dining room of their Malibu mansion. The chandelier casts shadows as Grace Carter stands resolute, her eyes cold, unyielding. Another $15 million sits in her account, a hollow apology for his seventh betrayal. A video from his latest fling mocks her, but this time, Grace is done. She's planned her escape, a contract signed in secret that could ruin him. Will she walk away with half his empire, or is there more at stake? As Daniel's world crumbles, a new figure, Jordan, offers Grace hope in Long Beach's gritty streets. Can she rebuild her life, or will the past pull her back? A tale of betrayal, defiance, and redemption unfolds. Will Grace's choice rewrite her future? Stay to uncover the truth. The Malibu mansion sprawled under the dawn's pale glow, its glass walls catching the first rays of sunlight over the Pacific. Grace Carter stood alone in the expansive living room, her silhouette sharp in a red midi dress, its square neckline framing her collarbone, wide shoulders accentuating her poise, the fabric cinching gently at her waist before flaring into a soft skirt. Her fingers gripped the edge of a marble countertop, the cold stone grounding her as her phone vibrated harshly against it. The screen lit up. A bank alert. $15 million deposited. Another betrayal from Daniel Reed, her husband etched in cold, hard numbers. Her heart clenched, not with surprise, but with a dull, familiar ache that had become her companion over years of his infidelity. Grace's breath caught as the phone buzzed again. A message from an unknown number. Her thumb hesitated, then pressed play on the attached video. The grainy footage flickered. Daniel, his white shirt unbuttoned, laughing in a Las Vegas penthouse, neon lights pulsing through the window. A woman, her face half shadowed, leaned into him, her lips brushing his ear. She turned to the camera, her voice sharp and mocking. "He says you'll stay for the money, Grace. Always do." The words sliced through her, each syllable a fresh wound. Grace's eyes stung, but she blinked back the tears, her jaw tightening. She'd heard variations of this taunt before, 6 times to be exact, each paired with a $15 million deposit, each a silent agreement to her humiliation. Her gaze drifted to the ocean beyond the glass, waves crashing in rhythm with her racing pulse. The money, now totaling $90 million in her account, was Daniel's way of keeping her tethered, a gilded chain she'd worn too long. She remembered the first time, years ago, when an anonymous email arrived with photos of him in a Miami hotel bar, a stranger's hand on his thigh. He'd knelt before her, eyes wet, promising it was a mistake. The $15 million that followed felt like penance, and she'd believed it could be. But the second, third, fourth times, each deposit, each taunt from his lovers, stripped away that illusion. She'd saved every message, every video, in a hidden drive, a digital shrine to her pain. Grace's fingers trembled as she set the phone down. She crossed the room to a sleek wooden cabinet, its surface polished to a mirror-like sheen. Inside a locked drawer, hidden beneath stacks of meaningless papers, was her salvation. A contract, meticulously drafted with her lawyer in secret. It was a revision to their prenup, a clause that would transfer half of Daniel's shares in his software empire to her if he betrayed her again. She'd prepared it after the 5th affair, when the weight of his promises crushed her hope. Now, with the 7th deposit burning in her account, she knew it was time. Her heart pounded as she clutched the folder, its edges creased from months of waiting. She could still feel the ghost of the woman she'd been, Grace Carter, the brilliant software engineer who'd captivated a room at a San Diego tech conference with her ideas on cybersecurity. That woman had believed in love, in Daniel's charm, his grand gestures. But that woman was gone, buried under years of silence and shame. Now every nerve in her body screamed for action, for an end to this cycle of betrayal. She moved to the staircase, her steps deliberate, the folder pressed against her chest. Downstairs, Daniel's voice echoed, carefree and loud, as he spoke on the phone. "Yeah, I'll be in Santa Monica tonight. Big party, you know how it goes." His laugh grated against her ears, a sound that once warmed her, but now felt like a blade. She paused at the landing, her breath steadying. This was the man who'd built an empire on innovation, but couldn't innovate loyalty. the man who thought $15 million could buy her soul. Grace descended, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor, each step a declaration. Daniel stood in the foyer, his white suit pristine, his blonde hair perfectly tousled. He glanced up, phone still at his ear, and flashed a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Hey, babe, what's up?" he said, his tone casual, as if the morning's deposit was just another Tuesday. She held out the folder, her voice calm but laced with steel. "Sign this." Her eyes locked onto his, unyielding, daring him to question her. Daniel raised an eyebrow, still chuckling into the phone. He took the folder, flipped to the last page, and scrawled his signature without a glance, as he always did with her business papers. He handed it back, already turning toward the door. "Handle it, Grace. I trust you," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Gotta run. Party's waiting." The door clicked shut behind him, and Grace stood frozen, the folder heavy in her hands. He hadn't even asked what he'd signed. He never did. That arrogance, that blind trust in her compliance, was his undoing. She opened the folder, tracing his signature with her fingertip, a quiet triumph stirring in her chest. This wasn't just a contract, it was her freedom, a guillotine poised to sever his empire. Half his company, his pride, now hung in her hands, activated by the video burning in her phone. She walked to the glass wall, the ocean stretching endlessly before her. The waves seemed to whisper, urging her forward. She thought of the women in those videos, their mocking voices, their certainty that she'd stay. They didn't know her. Neither did Daniel. He thought money could keep her caged, but she'd been forging the key for years. The contract was her weapon, and today she'd begun to wield it. Grace's chest tightened, not with pain but with a flicker of something new. Resolve. She'd spent years swallowing her pride, letting each deposit erode her sense of self. But this morning, with the seventh betrayal, something had shifted. The video, the money, the taunt. They weren't just wounds. They were fuel. She wasn't the woman who'd cried after the first affair, who'd believed in second chances. She was someone else now, someone who'd learned to play his game better than he ever could. She returned to the cabinet, sliding the contract back into its hiding place. Her phone buzzed again, another message from the unknown number. She didn't open it. Instead, she turned it face down, silencing the world Daniel thought he controlled. The mansion, with its cold elegance, felt like a stage for a play she no longer wanted to act in. She closed her eyes, letting the sound of the ocean wash over her. This was the beginning, not the end. She'd waited long enough. Her lips curved into a faint, determined smile. Daniel's party in Santa Monica would go on without him knowing the cost of his signature. But Grace knew, and for the first time in years, she felt the stirrings of power. Not his, but hers. Grace Carter stood in the quiet of the Malibu mansion's living room, the echo of Daniel's departing footsteps still lingering in her ears. The glass walls framed the Pacific, its waves rolling in a restless rhythm that mirrored her churning thoughts. The folder containing the signed contract lay hidden in the cabinet, a silent promise of her impending freedom. But freedom wasn't here yet. Her phone, now dark on the countertop, held the ghosts of betrayals past, each one marked by a $15 million deposit and a taunt that cut deeper than the last. Her chest tightened, not with fresh pain but with the heavy familiarity of it. A wound reopened so many times it had become a part of her. She crossed to the countertop, her fingers brushing the phone's cold surface. The memory of the first betrayal flooded back, unbidden. It had been a humid night in Miami, the air thick with the scent of jasmine and deceit. An anonymous email had arrived, a grainy photo attached. Daniel, his arm around a woman in a dimly lit hotel bar, his smile as careless as ever. Grace had confronted him, her voice shaking, her heart pleading for it to be a mistake. He'd knelt before her, his blue eyes glistening with what she'd mistaken for remorse. "I messed up, Grace," he'd said, his voice low. "But I love you. This." He gestured to his phone, where a bank alert confirmed a $15 million transfer. "This is my promise to fix it." She'd believed him, her love a fragile thread that held her to him. The money had felt like a bandage, something to cover the gash he'd left in her trust. But the bandage hadn't held. The second betrayal came months later, a text from an unknown number with a photo of Daniel in a New York club, a woman's hand on his chest. Then the third, a video from Chicago, the woman's laugh echoing as she whispered to him. Each time the same ritual, a $15 million deposit, a half-hearted apology, and Grace's silence. By the fourth, she'd stopped crying. By the fifth, she'd started saving the messages, photos, videos, voicemails, in a hidden drive, a grim archive of her humiliation. The sixth, a taunting voicemail from a woman in Seattle, had pushed her to meet with a lawyer in secret, drafting the contract that would turn Daniel's arrogance against him. Now the seventh, with its Las Vegas video still burning in her mind, was the final straw. Grace's fingers curled into fists, her nails digging into her palms. She could still hear the woman's voice from the video, sharp and cruel. "He says you'll stay for the money, Grace. Always do." The words weren't just a taunt. They were a mirror, forcing her to see the woman she'd become, someone who'd let money silence her pain. Her breath hitched, a mix of shame and fury rising in her throat. She'd been a software engineer, a woman who'd once commanded boardrooms with her brilliance. How had she let herself become this? A wife who stayed bought with millions that felt like chains. She walked to the glass wall, the ocean's endless churn a stark contrast to the stillness inside her. Each deposit had been a transaction, not just of money, but of her dignity. She remembered the second time, in New York, when Daniel had come home with a diamond bracelet. His smile too easy. "It's nothing, Grace," he'd said, tossing the bracelet onto the table. "Take the money, buy something nice." She'd wanted to scream, to throw the bracelet back, but she'd only nodded, the $15 million notification lighting up her phone. The third time in Chicago, he hadn't even come home. Just a text. "Check your account," followed by another video, the woman's laugh a knife in her gut. By the sixth, in Seattle, she'd stopped confronting him. The money arrived, and she'd added the voicemail to her collection, her silence louder than any words. Now, standing in the mansion's sterile elegance, Grace felt the weight of those silences. $90 million sat in her account, a fortune most would envy, but to her it was a ledger of her surrender. She closed her eyes, the sound of the waves blending with the memory of each notification's chime, each one a reminder of what she'd lost. Not just Daniel's love, but herself. Her fingers grazed the cabinet where the contract lay, its existence a spark of defiance she'd nurtured in secret. She'd gone to the lawyer after the fifth betrayal, her hands shaking as she outlined the clause. If Daniel cheated again, half his software company would be hers. The lawyer had raised an eyebrow but nodded, drafting a document airtight enough to withstand any challenge. Grace had kept it hidden, waiting for the moment her heart could match her mind's resolve. That moment was now. The seventh deposit, the Las Vegas video, the woman's mocking voice, they were the final push. Grace opened her eyes, her reflection in the glass sharp and unfamiliar. She wasn't the woman who'd cried over the first photo, who'd hoped for change. She was someone new, forged in the fire of repeated betrayal. Her heart raced, not with fear, but with purpose. Daniel's signature on the contract, scrawled without a glance, was her weapon. He thought he knew her, thought she'd stay, bought and broken. But he didn't know the woman she'd become. She turned from the glass, her steps purposeful as she crossed to the phone. Another message had arrived, the same unknown number. She didn't open it. Instead, she powered the device off, the screen going black with a soft click. The silence that followed was hers, not his. She imagined Daniel at his Santa Monica party, laughing, oblivious, his world still intact. He'd signed away half his empire without a second thought, his arrogance blinding him to the cliff he was walking toward. Grace's lips twitched, not quite a smile, but something close, a flicker of power she hadn't felt in years. She moved to the staircase, her hand trailing along the banister. The mansion, with its cold beauty, felt like a stage she'd outgrown. She didn't need to confront Daniel today. The contract was her voice, speaking louder than any words could. Each step up the stairs felt lighter, as if she were shedding the weight of those $15 million deposits one by one. The ocean's roar followed her, a chorus of encouragement. She didn't know what came next, not fully, but she knew one thing. She was done staying silent. In the quiet of the upper hall, Grace paused, her heart steady for the first time in years. Daniel's laughter, his parties, his betrayals, they were his story now, not hers. She'd spent too long letting his money define her pain. Today, with the contract in her hands, she'd begun to rewrite her own. Grace Carter paused at the top of the staircase, her hand lingering on the smooth banister, the ocean's distant roar filtering through the Malibu mansion's glass walls. The weight of the contract, now safely tucked away, pulsed in her mind like a heartbeat, but it was the memories that held her captive. Her chest ached with a longing she hadn't felt in years, not for Daniel, but for the woman she'd been before him, before the 15 million deposits and the mocking voices of his lovers. The silence of the house was oppressive, a mirror to the emptiness she'd carried through their marriage. She closed her eyes and the past rushed in, vivid and unyielding. It had begun in San Diego, at a tech conference where the air buzzed with ambition. Grace, a software engineer with a fire in her veins, stood on a stage, her voice steady as she unveiled a cybersecurity protocol she'd spent years perfecting. The crowd leaned forward, captivated, but it was Daniel Reed's gaze that burned through her. He was a rising star, a white billionaire with a smile that could disarm a room, his presence electric. After her talk, he'd found her in the lobby, his words smooth but earnest. "You're brilliant, Grace," he'd said, his blue eyes locking onto hers. "I've never seen anyone command a room like that." She'd laughed, brushing him off, her focus on her work, not his charm. But Daniel was relentless. He'd pursued her with a fervor that felt like destiny. There were dinners on a yacht off the California coast, the horizon blazing with sunset as he read her poetry he'd written himself. He'd filled a Malibu beach with lanterns for her birthday, each one glowing like a promise. Grace, who'd always guarded her heart, felt her walls crumble. She'd never known love like this, fierce, consuming, almost too big to hold. When he proposed under a starlit sky, kneeling in the sand, she didn't hesitate. "Yes," she'd whispered, her voice trembling with joy. The wedding in Malibu was a spectacle. Their union splashed across tech magazines as the power couple of the industry. Grace had believed in them, so fully that she'd set aside her career to support his empire, convinced their love would outshine everything. But the cracks appeared swiftly. The late-night calls, the business trips that stretched too long, the way his eyes avoided hers. The first betrayal hit like a tidal wave, that Miami photo shattering her trust. She'd confronted him, her voice raw, her hands shaking. "How could you?" she'd demanded, tears streaming down her face. Daniel had held her, his apologies a torrent of words. "It was nothing, Grace. I swear it won't happen again." The $15 million deposit that followed felt like a vow, and she'd clung to it, desperate to believe. But the second betrayal, the third, the fourth, they came like clockwork, each one chipping away at her heart. By the fifth, she'd stopped asking why. By the sixth, she'd stopped feeling the tears. Grace opened her eyes, her reflection faint in the hallway's mirror. The woman staring back was a stranger, hollowed out, her fire dimmed. She'd given up so much for Daniel, her career, her independence, her sense of self. Each $15 million deposit was a reminder of what she'd traded for this life. She remembered the Chicago video, the woman's laugh echoing as she leaned into Daniel, mocking Grace's silence. The Seattle voicemail, a taunting lilt. "He says you're his bank, darling." Grace had saved them all, not out of sentiment but as evidence, a ledger of her pain. She'd become a vault, locking away her hurt with each transfer, each one a heavier chain. Her fingers tightened on the banister, the wood cool against her skin. She thought of the conference, the woman who'd stood on that stage, unafraid, her voice carrying the weight of her dreams, that Grace had believed in love, in building something real. This Grace, standing in a mansion that felt like a mausoleum, had forgotten how to dream. The contract was her first step back to that woman, a calculated move born of pain and clarity. Daniel's signature, scrawled without care, was proof he didn't know her anymore, if he ever had. He saw her as the wife who stayed, bought with money and apologies. But she was done being that woman. She walked to the window, the ocean stretching endlessly before her. The waves seemed to whisper her name, urging her to remember who she was. Her heart ached, not for Daniel, but for the years she'd lost, the pieces of herself she'd let him steal. Each deposit had been a transaction of her dignity, a price she'd paid for too long. She thought of the lawyer's office, the quiet determination in her voice as she outlined the contract. If he cheats again, she told the lawyer, her hand steady, I want half of everything he values. The lawyer had nodded, her pen moving swiftly, crafting a clause that would turn Daniel's arrogance into his downfall. Grace's breath steadied, a quiet resolve settling in her bones. The $15 million notifications, the videos, the taunts, they weren't just wounds. They were her armor now. She'd spent years believing love could fix him, fix them. But love couldn't fix a man who saw betrayal as a game, who thought money could buy her soul. She turned from the window, her steps slow but certain, the mansion's silence no longer oppressive but expectant. She didn't need to confront Daniel today. The contract spoke for her, its power lying in wait. Her lips pressed into a thin line, a spark of defiance flickering in her chest. Daniel was at his Santa Monica party, laughing, oblivious to the storm she'd set in motion. He thought he knew her limits, thought she'd bend under the weight of his money. But Grace was no longer bending. She was breaking free piece by piece, and the contract was just the beginning. She moved to the staircase, descending with a purpose she hadn't felt in years. The ocean's song followed her, a reminder that she was still here, still whole despite everything. In the quiet of the foyer, Grace paused, her hand resting on the doorframe. The mansion, with its cold elegance, was his world, not hers. She'd been a guest here too long, playing a role she'd outgrown. The pain of Daniel's betrayals, the sting of those deposits, had forged something new in her, a woman ready to reclaim her story. Grace Carter descended the staircase of the Malibu mansion, the echo of her steps fading into the ocean's distant murmur. The contract, now a silent ally in its hidden drawer, had ignited a spark within her, a flicker of the woman she'd lost to years of Daniel's betrayals. Yet the weight of those $15 million deposits still clung to her, each one a reminder of the silence she'd bought with her pride. Her heart, though bruised, pulsed with a quiet resolve, urging her to seek something beyond the cold elegance of this gilded cage. She needed air, a place where the ghosts of Daniel's infidelity couldn't follow. Long Beach, with its gritty vibrancy, called to her like a beacon. The community tech fair in Long Beach buzzed with life, a stark contrast to the sterile quiet of her home. Children darted through the crowd, their laughter mingling with the hum of laptops and the chatter of volunteers. Grace wandered among the booths, her presence unnoticed in the sea of enthusiasm. She'd come here on a whim, driven by a need to escape the mansion's suffocating walls. Her chest felt lighter here, the air thick with purpose rather than pain. She paused at a booth where a group of teens huddled around a computer, their faces lit with excitement as they coded a simple game. A man stood among them, his voice warm and encouraging, guiding their hands with patience. His name was Jordan, a community organizer with a quiet strength that drew her in. His white skin contrasted with his worn jeans and faded t-shirt, his brown eyes bright with a passion that felt foreign to her. "Keep going. You're almost there," he told a shy girl, his smile genuine as she typed a line of code. Grace watched, her heart stirring with an unfamiliar warmth. She hadn't expected to feel anything here, but Jordan's ease, his care for these kids, cracked open a door she'd thought long closed. She approached, hesitant, her voice soft. "What's this project?" she asked, gesturing to the screen. Jordan looked up, his gaze meeting hers without judgment. "Teaching kids to code games," he said, his tone inviting. "Want to try?" Grace laughed, a sound that surprised her, rusty from disuse. She shook her head, but he persisted, pulling a chair for her. "Come on, it's fun, no pressure." Against her better judgment, she sat, her fingers brushing the keyboard. For a moment, she was the engineer again, the woman who'd once built systems from nothing. Their conversation flowed effortlessly, his questions about her interests cutting through her guarded walls. "You look like you know your way around code," he said, nodding at her quick grasp of the game. Grace's smile faltered, memories of her career flashing by. Boardrooms, presentations, the thrill of creation. "I used to," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Jordan didn't pry, but his eyes held hers, steady and kind. "You still can," he said simply, and those words landed like a lifeline in her chest. Days later, when stress sent her to the hospital, her body buckling under the weight of years, Jordan was there. He'd heard from a mutual friend at the fair, showing up with a worn sci-fi novel and a lopsided grin. "Thought you might need a distraction," he said, settling into the chair beside her bed. Grace stared, her throat tight. Daniel had never come, not for doctor's visits, not for anything that didn't serve his ego. But Jordan stayed, reading passages aloud, his voice a soothing anchor through the sterile beeps of monitors. He didn't ask about her life, her pain, or the $15 million notifications that haunted her phone. He just saw her, Grace, not the billionaire's wife. When she was discharged, Grace offered to fund his community program, her voice tentative. "You're doing good work," she said, her hands twisting in her lap. "I can help." Jordan leaned back, his expression soft but firm. "I don't want your money, Grace," he said, his eyes unwavering. "I want to see you smile like you did at the fair. That's worth more." Her breath caught, a rush of warmth flooding her chest. No one had spoken to her like that in years. Not Daniel, not the women who taunted her, not even herself. She felt seen, not as a trophy or a transaction, but as a person with a spark worth kindling. Their meetings became a quiet ritual. Coffee at a Long Beach cafe, walks along the pier, conversations that peeled back layers of her guarded heart. Jordan shared stories of his work, his dreams for the kids he taught, his belief in second chances, not for others but for oneself. Grace listened, her heart aching with a mix of hope and guilt. She hadn't told him about Daniel, about the millions, about the contract. She didn't want his pity, only his presence. But each time they spoke, she felt a piece of herself return, the woman who'd once believed in her own strength. One evening, under the pier's fading light, Jordan handed her a small notebook. "Write something," he said, his voice gentle. "A line of code, a dream, anything." Grace hesitated, her fingers tracing the pages. She hadn't written code since she'd left her career for Daniel. But Jordan's belief in her, unshakable and unassuming, stirred something deep. She scribbled a line, a simple function, a fragment of her old self. Her eyes stung, not with pain but with possibility. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick. Jordan just nodded, his smile a quiet promise. Grace's heart raced as she walked back to her car, the notebook clutched to her chest. Jordan hadn't asked for anything, hadn't demanded her secrets or her story. He'd given her space to breathe, to remember who she was before the betrayals, before the money, the $15 million deposits, the videos, the taunts. They still lingered, but their grip was loosening. She thought of the contract, waiting in its drawer, and the power it held. For the first time, she didn't feel like a victim of Daniel's game. She felt like a woman with a choice. She glanced back at the pier, where Jordan was packing up, his silhouette small against the sunset. Her chest swelled with a feeling she hadn't named in years. Hope. It was fragile, fleeting, but real. She wasn't ready to tell him everything, not yet. But with every step away from the mansion, from Daniel's world, she felt closer to the woman she'd been, the woman she could still be. Grace Carter stood in the shadowed hallway of the Malibu mansion, the echo of Jordan's quiet encouragement still warming her chest. The notebook he'd given her, with its single line of code, lay tucked in her purse, a fragile reminder of the woman she was reclaiming. But the air in the house was heavy, thick with the residue of Daniel's betrayals. Each $15 million deposit a chain she'd worn too long. Her heart pounded, not with fear but with a fierce clarity. The contract, hidden in its drawer, was no longer just a plan. It was her weapon, and tonight she would wield it. The sound of Daniel's car pulling into the driveway cut through the silence, a low rumble that set her nerves alight. She descended the staircase, her steps deliberate, each one grounding her resolve. The dining room was bathed in the chandelier's soft glow, its crystal prisms casting fractured light across the polished table. Daniel entered, his white suit pristine, his blonde hair catching the light as he tossed his keys onto the counter. He carried a velvet box, its surface gleaming with promise, and his smile was as easy as ever. "Hey, babe," he said, his voice smooth, oblivious to the storm brewing in her eyes. "I messed up again. You got the money, right? 15 mil. And this?" He slid the box toward her, its contents glinting through a sliver of open lid. "For you." Grace's gaze fell on the box, a diamond necklace sparkling inside, its brilliance mocking her pain. Her chest tightened, the familiar sting of his betrayals rising like bile. She thought of the Las Vegas video, the woman's taunting voice. "He says you'll stay for the money, Grace." She thought of the Miami photo, the New York club, the Chicago laugh, the Seattle voicemail, each one paired with a deposit, each one a piece of her dignity traded away. Her fingers twitched, but she didn't reach for the box. Instead, she met Daniel's eyes, her stare cold and unyielding. "No," she said, her voice low but sharp, cutting through the room like a blade. "I don't want your money anymore, Daniel. We're done." The words felt like a release, each syllable unshackling a part of her soul. Daniel's smile faltered, his brow creasing as if he hadn't heard right. He laughed, a nervous edge to it, and pushed the box closer. "Come on, Grace, don't be like that. You know I'm sorry. Take it. Let's move on." Her heart raced, a mix of fury and liberation surging through her. She pushed the box back, the scrape of velvet against wood echoing like a gunshot. "You don't get it," she said, her voice rising, steady and fierce. "I'm not your transaction anymore. You signed the contract, Daniel. Half your company is mine now." The air stilled, the chandelier's light seeming to dim as her words landed. Daniel's face drained of color, his eyes widening in disbelief. "What contract?" he stammered, his voice cracking. "What are you talking about?" Grace stepped closer, her presence commanding, her pain transformed into power. "The one you signed without reading," she said, each word deliberate. "The one that takes half your empire if you cheat again. That video from Las Vegas? It's all I needed." She pulled her phone from her pocket, the screen dark but heavy with evidence. Daniel lunged forward, his hands shaking. "You can't do this, Grace," he shouted, his voice raw with panic. "You can't take my company." "I already have," she said, her tone unyielding, a fire in her chest she hadn't felt in years. "Goodbye, Daniel." She turned, her steps steady as she moved toward the staircase. His voice followed, desperate, breaking. "Grace, don't do this. I'll change, I swear. Don't leave me." She paused just for a moment, her hand on the banister. His pleas were an echo of the past, of the nights she'd believed him, of the tears she'd shed for a man who saw her as a prize to be bought. But she wasn't that woman anymore. Her heart thudded, not with doubt but with certainty. She thought of Jordan, his quiet belief in her, the notebook that held her first line of code in years. She thought of the woman she'd been, the engineer who'd dreamed big, who'd stood tall. That woman was still inside her, and she was done letting Daniel's money silence her. "You don't get to decide anymore," she said, her voice soft but final, not turning to face him. "This is my choice." Daniel's shouts grew frantic, his words tumoring over each other. "Grace, please, I need you. I'll do anything." But his voice was just noise now, fading as she climbed the stairs. Each step felt lighter, as if she were shedding the weight of those $15 million deposits, the taunts, the years of silence. The chandelier's light flickered behind her, casting long shadows that stretched toward freedom. She reached the upper hall, her breath steady, her heart alive with a purpose she'd forgotten. Grace stopped at the window, the ocean's dark expanse glittering under the moon. The waves seemed to roar her name, a chorus of strength. She didn't need Daniel's money, his apologies, his world. She'd spent years believing she could fix him, fix them, but she'd been fixing the wrong thing. The contract, now activated by his signature and the Las Vegas video, was her declaration of independence. She'd played his game long enough, and now she'd won. Her lips curved into a faint smile, not of triumph, but of peace. Daniel's cries echoed below, a desperate plea for a second chance she no longer owed him. She turned from the window, her resolve a quiet flame. The mansion, with its cold beauty, was his prison, not hers. She was done being his wife, his victim, his silence. She was Grace Carter, and she was ready to write her own story. Grace Carter stood at the top of the Malibu mansion's staircase, Daniel's desperate cries still echoing from below. His pleas, "Grace, don't do this! I'll change!" faded into a hollow drone, like the ocean's waves crashing against her resolve. Her heart pounded, not with doubt but with a fierce, unshakable certainty. The contract, now a ticking bomb in its hidden drawer, had shifted the power in her favor, but it was her words, her final no, that had set her free. She moved to the bedroom, her steps steady, each one a step away from the life she'd outgrown. The air felt lighter, as if the mansion's oppressive elegance was loosening its grip on her soul. She opened the closet, her fingers brushing past rows of designer dresses, their silks and satins a testament to Daniel's wealth, but not her worth. She pulled out a small leather suitcase, its worn edges a relic from her days as a software engineer, before she traded her dreams for his. Her chest tightened, a mix of grief and liberation swirling within her. She packed lightly, a few sweaters, jeans, the notebook Jordan had given her with its single line of code. Each item felt like a choice, a reclaiming of herself from the wreckage of their marriage. She zipped the suitcase, the sound sharp in the quiet room, a declaration of her intent. Grace paused before the framed wedding photo on the nightstand. Her younger self smiled back, radiant in white. Daniel's arm around her, his eyes full of promises, now broken. She remembered that day in Malibu, the sea breeze carrying her hopes, the world believing they were unstoppable. But those hopes had crumbled with each $15 million deposit, each taunting video, each piece of her heart he'd discarded. She lifted the frame, her fingers trembling, and set it face down. "Not anymore," she whispered, her voice soft but resolute. The woman in that photo deserved better, and Grace was done denying her. She dragged the suitcase to the hallway, the wheels rumbling against the hardwood, a steady rhythm that matched her heartbeat. Daniel's voice grew louder as she descended, raw and frantic. "Grace, please, don't leave me like this." He stood in the foyer, his white suit rumpled, his blonde hair disheveled, tears streaking his face. He reached for her, his hands shaking. "I'll do anything, I swear. I need you." His words were a torrent, but they no longer held power over her. She saw him now, not the charming billionaire who'd swept her off her feet, but a man undone by his own arrogance, clinging to a life he thought he could buy. Grace stopped at the bottom of the stairs, the suitcase a quiet sentinel beside her. Her eyes met his, unflinching. "You needed me to stay silent," she said, her voice low, cutting through his sobs. "You needed me to be your excuse, your trophy. But I'm not yours anymore." Her words landed like stones, each one heavy with the truth she'd buried for years. Daniel stumbled forward, his hands outstretched, but she stepped back, the suitcase a barrier between them. "Grace, I love you," he choked out, his voice breaking. "Don't do this." Her heart clenched, not with love but with the ghost of it, the memory of who she'd thought he was. She thought of the Miami photo, the New York club, the Las Vegas video, each betrayal a weight she'd carried alone. She thought of Jordan, his quiet strength, his belief in her when she'd forgotten how to believe in herself. "You don't love me," she said, her voice steady, a fire burning in her chest. "You love controlling me, but I'm done." She gripped the suitcase handle, her knuckles whitening, and moved toward the door. Daniel fell to his knees, his sobs echoing in the foyer's vast emptiness. "Grace, please! I'll stop, I'll fix it," he cried, his hands clawing at the air. The sound tore at her, a faint echo of the pain she'd felt with every $15 million deposit. But she didn't look back. She pushed open the heavy glass door, the night air cool against her skin, the moon casting a silver path before her. The ocean roared in the distance, a chorus of freedom. She stepped outside, the suitcase rolling behind her, its wheels grinding against the gravel drive. Rain began to fall, soft at first, then steady, soaking her clothes, but she didn't care. Each drop felt like a baptism, washing away the years of silence, the shame of staying. She thought of Jordan waiting in Long Beach, his old pickup truck a promise of something real. She didn't know what lay ahead, but for the first time, that uncertainty felt like a gift. The mansion loomed behind her, its lights fading in the rain, Daniel's cries swallowed by the night. She kept walking, the suitcase's rhythm a steady heartbeat, her breath mingling with the rain. She reached the gate, the moonlight glinting off the wet gravel. Her chest swelled, not with pain but with a quiet triumph. She'd spent years believing she could fix Daniel, fix their marriage, but she'd been fixing the wrong thing. The contract, the money, the betrayals, they were his story. This moment, this step into the rain, was hers. She paused, tilting her face to the sky, letting the rain wash over her. A faint smile curved her lips, the first real one in years. She was Grace Carter, not Daniel's wife, not his victim. She was enough. The gate creaked as she pushed it open, the sound sharp against the rain's soft patter. Daniel's voice was gone now, lost to the night. She didn't need to hear his pleas anymore. They belonged to a life she was leaving behind. The ocean's song grew louder, urging her forward, a reminder that she was free. She stepped through the gate, the suitcase trailing behind, her heart lighter than it had been in years. The rain fell harder, but it couldn't touch the fire within her. She was walking away, not running, and that made all the difference. The rain-soaked gravel crunched beneath Grace Carter's shoes as she stepped beyond the Malibu mansion's gate, leaving Daniel's fading cries behind. The moonlight, sharp and silver, had guided her out, but now the road to Long Beach stretched ahead, a promise of something new. Her heart, unburdened for the first time in years, thrummed with a quiet fire, a blend of defiance and hope that burned brighter with each step. The suitcase's wheels rolled steadily, a rhythm of her newfound freedom. But the weight of Daniel's betrayals, those $15 million deposits, and the contract now poised to upend his world lingered in her mind, not as pain, but as proof of her strength. She'd said no, walked away, and that was enough for now. In Silicon Valley, the air in the boardroom was thick with tension, the sleek glass table reflecting the cold faces of Daniel's partners. He stood at the head, his white suit creased, his usual charm faltering under their stares. The contract Grace had tricked him into signing had activated, transferring half his software company's shares to her. The news had hit like a thunderbolt, and the board's fury was palpable. "You signed away half the company without reading?" one partner snapped, his voice cutting through the silence. Daniel's hands shook, his voice hoarse. "It was a mistake," he stammered. "Grace, she manipulated me." But his excuses fell flat, drowned by the rustle of papers and the board's murmurs. Grace wasn't there to witness his unraveling. She was in Long Beach, at a community center where the hum of voices and the clatter of keyboards filled the air. She stood beside Jordan, guiding a group of teens through a coding workshop, her voice steady as she explained a line of code. Her heart swelled with a warmth she hadn't felt in years, a sense of purpose that Daniel's money could never buy. The kids' laughter, their eager questions, grounded her in a way the Malibu mansion never had. She glanced at Jordan, his brown eyes bright as he helped a boy debug a program. His presence was a quiet anchor, a reminder that she was no longer alone. Daniel's world, meanwhile, was crumbling. The board voted unanimously to remove him as CEO, their voices cold, final. "Your recklessness ends here," the chairman said, slamming a gavel that echoed like a death knell. News of his affairs, 7, each marked by a $15 million transfer, had leaked to the press, splashed across tabloids with headlines that branded him a fool. His phone, once buzzing with invitations, now rang with reporters and angry investors. He sat alone in his office, the Silicon Valley skyline mocking him through the window. "Grace," he whispered, his voice breaking, "how could you?" But she wasn't there to answer, and the silence was his only reply. Back in Long Beach, Grace felt the vibration of her phone, a call from Daniel. She let it go to voicemail, her fingers steady as she helped a girl tweak her code. The message was desperate, his voice raw. "Grace, please, we need to talk. I'm losing everything." She deleted it without listening to the end, her heart untouched. The man who'd bought her silence with millions was no longer her burden. She thought of the Las Vegas video, the woman's taunt, the 6 other deposits that had tried to chain her. They were his mistakes, not hers, and she was done carrying them. As the workshop wound down, the sun dipped low, painting the community center in hues of orange and red. Grace stepped outside, the air cool against her skin, when a woman approached. Lena, Daniel's latest fling, her white skin flushed with anger, her eyes sharp. "You're Grace, aren't you?" she said, her voice trembling with rage. "He promised me everything, money, a future, then ghosted me when it all fell apart." Grace met her gaze, unflinching, her heart calm. Lena's words were a mirror of her own pain, but they no longer cut. "He's not my problem anymore," Grace said, her voice steady, a quiet strength in every word. "He never was what he promised." Lena's shoulders slumped, her anger softening into something like relief. She nodded, turning away, her footsteps fading into the evening. Grace watched her go, her chest tight but not with pain. Compassion, perhaps, for a woman caught in Daniel's web, but also pride in her own escape. She thought of the contract, now shifting the balance of power, and the $15 million deposits that had once defined her. They were nothing compared to this moment, standing under the Long Beach sky, free. Jordan joined her outside, his presence a quiet comfort. "You okay?" he asked, his voice soft, his eyes searching hers. Grace nodded, a faint smile breaking through. "Better than okay," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm here." He didn't push, didn't ask about Daniel or the call. He just stood beside her, the sunset casting long shadows around them. Grace's heart ached, not with loss but with possibility. She'd spent years believing she needed Daniel's world, his money, his love to feel whole. But here, in the hum of a community center, with Jordan's steady presence, she felt something better, herself. She thought of Daniel, alone in his office, his empire slipping through his fingers. His tears, his pleas, were his to bear now. She'd carried his betrayals long enough, each $15 million deposit a weight she'd finally shed. The contract was her justice, but this moment, this place, was her victory. She looked at the kids streaming out of the center, their faces bright with pride, and felt a fire kindle in her chest. She was Grace Carter, not Daniel's wife, not his victim. She was a woman who'd chosen herself, and that was enough. The horizon glowed, the last rays of sunlight fading into dusk. Grace's breath steadied, her heart full. She didn't need to look back at Malibu, at the mansion, at Daniel. Her future was here, in the gritty streets of Long Beach, in the code she was teaching, in the quiet strength of the man beside her. She was free, and the world was hers to reclaim. The Long Beach sunset had faded, leaving Grace Carter standing outside the community center, the air cool against her skin. The encounter with Lena, Daniel's last betrayal, lingered like a faint echo, but it couldn't touch the fire now burning in her chest. The contract, the $15 million deposits, the mansion in Malibu, they were shadows of a life she'd left behind. Her heart, once weighed down by years of silence, now thrummed with a quiet joy, a sense of self she'd rediscovered in the gritty streets of Long Beach. Jordan's presence beside her, steady and unassuming, was a reminder that she wasn't alone. She was Grace Carter, and she was enough. She'd moved into a small apartment near the community center, its modest walls a stark contrast to the cold elegance of Daniel's world. The space was hers, simple, cluttered with books and a laptop where she'd begun consulting on software projects again. Each line of code she wrote felt like a reclamation, a piece of the woman who'd once dreamed big. Her fingers danced across the keyboard, the rhythm familiar, comforting. She wasn't just rebuilding her career, she was rebuilding herself, line by line, choice by choice. Her chest swelled with pride, a feeling she hadn't known in years, as she guided teens through coding workshops, their eager faces mirroring the spark she'd thought lost. Jordan was a constant, his quiet strength a thread woven into her days. They worked side by side at the center, teaching kids to build games, their laughter filling the air. He didn't push her to share her past, didn't ask about the mansion or the millions, but his presence, his gentle questions, his easy smiles, coaxed her heart open. One evening, as they sorted supplies after a workshop, Grace caught him watching her, his brown eyes soft. "You're different here," he said, his voice low. "Lighter, like you're home." Her throat tightened, a rush of warmth flooding her. "I am," she whispered, her voice thick with truth. Long Beach, with its raw energy, felt more like home than Malibu ever had. The news of Daniel's downfall reached her in fragments, headlines on her phone, whispers from old acquaintances. His software company was crumbling, its stock plummeting after his ousting as CEO. The tabloids feasted on his scandals, each affair laid bare, each $15 million deposit a mark of his shame. He'd called her, his voicemails a desperate litany. "Grace, I'm nothing without you. Please talk to me." She deleted them without listening, her heart untouched. Daniel's tears, his empire's collapse, were his to bear. She'd carried his betrayals long enough, each one a weight she'd shed when she walked out into the rain. One night, under the stars on a quiet Long Beach shore, Jordan and Grace sat on a weathered bench, the ocean's soft roar a backdrop to their silence. He handed her a coffee, his fingers brushing hers, and spoke, his voice hesitant. "I haven't been fully honest," he said, his eyes fixed on the waves. "I come from money, a lot of it, but I walked away. I wanted a life that meant something." Grace's heart skipped, not with surprise but with recognition. She'd sensed his depth, his choice to live simply despite what he could have had. "I knew you were too good to be true," she teased, her smile warm. "But you're real. That's what matters." Jordan laughed, the sound easing the last of her guarded edges. "You're real too, Grace," he said, his gaze steady. "More than you know." Her chest ached, not with pain, but with a fullness she hadn't felt in years. She thought of the woman she'd been, silenced by Daniel's money, defined by his betrayals. That woman was gone, replaced by someone who coded, laughed, and lived on her own terms. Jordan hadn't saved her. He'd reminded her she could save herself. She leaned back, the stars above a canvas of possibility. The community center, the kids, the code. They were her new anchors, grounding her in a way Daniel's millions never could. She thought of the contract, now a silent victory, and the $15 million deposits that had once chained her. They were his story, not hers. She'd chosen to walk away, to write a new chapter, and that choice had set her free. Grace's fingers traced the edge of the bench, the wood rough under her touch. She remembered the Las Vegas video, the woman's taunt, the weight of those deposits. They'd tried to break her, but they'd forged her instead. She looked at Jordan, his profile sharp against the starlight, and felt a quiet certainty. He wasn't her savior, but he was her partner, someone who saw her as she was. Grace, not a billionaire's wife, not a victim. Her heart swelled, a mix of gratitude and strength. The ocean whispered, its rhythm steady like her breath. Daniel's world was crumbling, but hers was rising. She didn't need his money, his apologies, his name. She had her own. Grace Carter, software engineer, teacher, survivor. The stars seemed to shine brighter, each one a promise of what she could build. She smiled, her heart light, and leaned closer to Jordan. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but sure, "for seeing me." He turned, his eyes warm. "Always will," he said, and the simplicity of his words wrapped around her like a homecoming. Grace looked out at the sea, its waves endless, unyielding. She was free, not just from Daniel, but from the woman she'd been. She was home, in Long Beach, in herself, and that was everything. Grace Carter's journey, from the sting of betrayal to the triumph of self-discovery, ends with a spark of hope under Long Beach's starry sky. Her defiance against Daniel's $15 million chains and her embrace of a life true to herself invite us to reflect. What would you do when faced with a choice between comfort and courage? Share your thoughts. Did Grace's story resonate with you? Did her strength inspire? Or did Daniel's fall surprise? Your voice matters in this tale of redemption. Thank you for joining Grace on this emotional ride through heartbreak and healing. Your presence has brought her story to life. Stay tuned for more stories that stir the soul, where choices shape destinies. Until we meet again, keep seeking your own spark of freedom.